Hello everyone, this is Dr. Lashik. For this part of the lecture, we will talk about interrogating association claims. In this particular lecture, we're going to cover construct validity, external validity, and internal validity. Statistical validity will be completed in a different lecture. There are three types of important validities when considering association claims: construct, statistical, and external. We're still going to talk about internal validity here, but as you'll see in a second, it's not as important when considering association claims. Let's recover what each of the main validities are all about. The first, construct validity, we had a whole chapter, I believe it was chapter 5, on what construct validity was. And it asks how well was each variable measured or manipulated. And we haven't talked about how things are manipulated yet, because that's in regards to experimental research and causal claims. With association claims, we're only measuring multiple variables. We're usually measuring two variables and then correlating them together. In that case, construct validity is only considered with regard to measurement. Statistical validity, the second one, there's going to be another whole lecture that goes over this in great detail. But suffice to say, it is how well does our data support our conclusions. Internal validity concerns whether or not we can make a causal inference with our conclusions. And if that wording doesn't make sense with regards to associations, it shouldn't, because causal inferences are only involved with causal claims. And so why we're talking about internal validity here with regards to association claims is because we want to demonstrate more in depth why association claims cannot have any causal language associated with them. And internal validity helps us figure that out. External validity is all about generalizability and whether or not our sample is representative of the population of interest. Construct validity, again, asks whether or not our variables were measured accurately. And whether or not our measurements are measuring what we actually think they are. To assess construct validity, we have to remember it's composed of 5 different types of validity: face, content, criterion, convergent, and discriminant. And we had a whole chapter on all of this, so we won't go into this in too much detail. Just remember that this is a very important validity when discussing association claims, because we need to make sure that whatever two variables or however many variables we're measuring, that they're being measured correctly. Remember from the previous chapter where we discussed construct validity. Construct validity is composed of 5 different subtypes of validity and 3 different reliabilities, depending on, of course, what type of measurement we are using. For example, test-retest reliability is only relevant for some self-report measures. Similarly, inter-rater reliability is also only relevant for certain types of measurement. But these are the kinds of questions we should be asking ourselves when we are wondering whether or not an association claim has good construct validity, whether or not the measurements that they use are truly measuring what they hoped to measure. And just again, as a reminder, these different parts of this construct validity that we should ask ourselves have to do with test-retest reliability, internal reliability, inter-rater reliability, face validity, content validity, criterion validity, convergent validity, and discriminant validity. Internal validity assesses the degree to which causation is accurate and the degree to which there is no other alternative solutions that we just failed to measure that could actually be the culprit for why we got the results we did. So just with that wording again, like I said in the previous slides, internal validity does not apply to association claims, but it needs to be considered with association claims to temper us, to make sure that we are not interpreting our association claim results incorrectly. It is way too easy to think of association claims as causal claims. For instance, let's say that we have an association claim that says that people who date online are more likely to have happier marriages. If we hear that, it is way too easy for our brains to interpret that as, well, if I date online, it will cause me to have a happier marriage. This simply just isn't true. Similarly, we could interpret the association claim that people who take aspirin every day are much less likely to get a heart attack. It's easy to then interpret that, well, I should probably start taking aspirin every day because it will cause me not to have a heart attack. The problem with these association claims is that really what you should be interpreting is that these two things just happen to be occurring together frequently. And that's all we know of the information. It's possible that one causes the other, but we don't know that. We didn't assess that yet. We would have to do an experiment to find that out. Association claims just are telling us when two things happen to occur together frequently. There are 3 rules for causality that are associated with internal validity. So when we're assessing internal validity of an experiment, we would run through each of these 3 rules of causality. We can run through these 3 rules of causality for association claims too, to provide us more reason to believe that association claims are not causal in nature. The first rule for causality is covariance of cause and effect. And this means that variable 1 and variable 2 must be correlated in some way, or covary. And when we're considering this first step with regards to experimental research, the manipulated variable and the measured variable must be correlated. With association claims, since both variables are simply measured, they must be correlated. The second rule is temporal precedence. This means that the manipulated variable, when considering experimental research, must come before the measured variable in time. So chronologically, we should have manipulated something and then measured something else, and that change was due to the manipulation. So temporal precedence is the thing that we manipulated came in time before the measured variable. The third rule for causality is internal validity, and that means that there is no other alternate explanation for why we got the results we did. So when we're considering these rules of causality for association claims, the first rule, rule number 1 of covariance, is true for association claims. However, rules 2 and 3 are not. So when we're talking about associations, we're also talking about correlations or covariance, and so it meets that first rule of causality, but it does not necessarily meet temporal precedence or internal validity. The reason it doesn't meet the temporal precedence rule is because since we're just measuring 2 variables, we don't know which one came first in time. For instance, if we have the association claim that the more intimate conversations a couple has, the more marital satisfaction they experience. Let's say we have that association claim. In finding that information out, we only just asked them how much marital satisfaction do you experience and how many intimate conversations do you have. We've measured both things after the fact, after they've already occurred. And so we don't know which one came first, so temporal precedence is never satisfied with association claims. Internal validity has similar issues. We can come up with almost an infinite number of alternative solutions for another variable that could be causing both A and B. This is also known as the third variable problem. Again, since we just measured these things, it could be that intimate conversations caused relationship satisfaction or vice versa, or it could be a completely different variable that was not measured at all. So let's apply these rules of causality to an example association claim. Let's use the one I just said. The more intimate conversations one has with one's partner, the more marital satisfaction they experience. So let's consider the first step, the covariance of cause and effect, or the first rule of causality. Both are correlated, so this rule is satisfied. Again, association claims satisfy Rule 1. However, it fails at Rule 2, the temporal precedence. It is possible that the more a couple talks, or intimate conversations they have, that this actually causes a greater amount of marital satisfaction. But it is also possible that because the couple has high marital satisfaction, that actually causes them to talk more. We're not sure which one came first, because again, we've only just measured both variables. So Rule 2 is not satisfied. We're not sure which one came first. We are unsure of the direction of the relationship. Finally, Rule 3, internal validity. We are asking ourselves whether or not other factors could have been causing both marital satisfaction and intimate conversations. And there's a lot of things in a relationship that could possibly be causing both marital satisfaction and intimate conversations. For instance, maybe stress actually can impact how much someone wants to talk to their romantic partners and their appraisal of their relationship satisfaction. So stress could be that third variable, or variable C, that's actually causing both A and B. Since these alternative explanations are possible, probably a limitless number of them, the third rule is also not satisfied. So regardless of the wording of the association claim, we are not sure if we've measured all of the possible variables because we have not manipulated anything. And again, this is the third variable problem. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the third variable problem, or the third rule of causality that we just discussed on the previous slide. We can actually determine if we have a third variable problem by graphing our information and accounting for the potential third variable that we've discovered. So maybe we are looking at an association claim, again, between intimate conversations and our happiness in our marriage or marital satisfaction. And we decide that education level might be the third variable that's causing both things to occur. So maybe education level is making people have more conversations, and education level is also making them rate their marriages as being more satisfactory than people who have low education levels. So here is, on the left here on the slide, is a graph where if you ignored the colors of the blue and green dots and you just looked at the dots by themselves, you would see a positive correlational trend between marital satisfaction and conversations. But then if you looked at the green dots exclusively, which would be the high education level people, you would see that they're just kind of all scattered about. There's no real trend going anywhere. It's just kind of dots in a circle. Similarly, if you look at just the blue dots, which would be the low education people, you would see that there's really no trend within that circle, the blue circle. So in this case, this would be a third variable problem. The relationship doesn't exist if we account for the potential third variable. If we account for education level, there is no relationship, meaning that substantive conversations and marital satisfaction aren't actually related in any way. The third variable is causing both. On the right-hand side of this picture, we have another graph shows the similar information. However, if you look at the green dots only, which are high education level, you see that they actually still follow a positive correlational trend by themselves if you ignore the blue dots. So this shows that if you account for education level, there's still a relationship between conversations and marital satisfaction. And that shows that there is still a relationship. We don't have a third variable problem. If we have a relationship between conversations and marital satisfaction, and we graph it like we did, and we get something that looks like it does on the left here, where we find out we actually don't have a real relationship, this is called a spurious correlation. So sometimes things are correlated that have nothing to do with one another because we didn't measure the right things. And those are what we call spurious correlations. All right, just as a final thought about internal validity before we move on to external validity, just remember, again, since internal validity is a causal issue, we don't really have to interrogate it when considering association claims. But we do have to be wary that we are not interpreting our association claims as causal and consider the 3 rules of causality to keep us in check. All right, external validity. Again, we just had a whole chapter about this topic, generalizability, and whether or not our results from our sample can be generalized to the population of interest. So does our sample represent the population of interest that we are trying to describe? So in order to assess this, just like we talked about in the last chapter, we have to consider who was studied, and instead of again considering the sample size, so just the sheer number, we have to consider how the sample was selected. Did they use random sampling techniques or not? Now we have to ask ourselves then too, so if we've determined that they did use truly a random sample, or if they didn't use enough people, should we then disregard their results completely? Not necessarily. Remember, it depends on the importance of generalization and who the population of interest is. Maybe instead of disregarding their work entirely, take it with a grain of salt and then try replicating their study with a different sample to see if their results hold up. All right, that's it for this lecture. Please don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions.